Okay, so that's all from us. We hope you have an interesting conference, pleasant days here in Vienna, and we'd like to give the stage to Duncan Campbell.
Thanks very much, René, and thank you, welcome, and good morning. Some of you may know I've been here before. My profession is journalist, although I also work as a forensic computer expert. My background is in physics, so the advantage I see we have and the problem perhaps they see is that I know the technology and can try and help explain some of the things that have been behind closed doors for decades. My talk was going to be, can societies manage the SIGINT monster? The revelations, the understandings of the scale of bulk surveillance that Edward Snowden has brought to our attention. But in this week, at this time, we are yet again forced to confront the appalling evidence of its failure. Years after these programs were introduced and enhanced in the wake of 9/11, in Boston, New York, in Texas, in London, in Copenhagen, and in Paris earlier this year, the mass surveillance and analysis of data simply failed. Nothing kept people safe. So the question is not just the trade-off as alleged between privacy and security, which I think a look at the technology properly rebukes, but whether by bringing an understanding of their technologies from outside their secret world, we could be safer and have more privacy and security and integrity at the same time. The issues we face are the secret but now disclosed trend towards collecting everything that is accessible on digital communications, set against privacy. The proclaimed goal of taking everything and yet never explaining or justifying the proportionality required by the laws of human rights. The effectiveness is presumed by the reach of what they do and the power of their computer systems. But what hundreds of people and their families in Paris saw this weekend was a gross system failure. And it gets worse than that when you start to look at just some of the details of the systems we can talk about here. I'm going to start by making this personal. Anybody got a data connection line? Put your hands up. Who's got a data connection line? One or two? Yeah, of course you have. And where do you think your packets are going, and how many people are getting them right here from this particular room? We'll come to that. The technologies that are disclosed by Edward Snowden appear opaque, but actually, if you're technically trained, they are familiar and easy to understand. And in this context, and looking at some of the particular technologies, we can do privacy and security. We can defeat the fallacy that more security means less privacy. Did you need something?
Yeah, excuse me for a moment. Could you please just adjust the microphone a little bit so that we don't have plops? Let's try this.
We're aiming for the plop-free zone.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Where your packets go. In a conference like this, you're kind of familiar with some of the systems that people can be using and may be using, and I don't know if there's a wall of sheep here, there was one time before, there will be in the future. But it doesn't just stop there, because a few streets, literally 3 streets from here, there's some rather extraordinary equipment, which may very well, very likely be collecting on the packets that you in the audience with your live data connections are sending and receiving. That site that we're pointing to from the hotel is Jorgasse 12. It's the embassy of the United Kingdom. And on the roof of it is kind of an odd piece of architecture. This is a so-called rooftop maintenance shed. You can see the television cameras guarding it. You can't see the barbed wire. What you're looking at is a dielectric cage. These white panels are opaque, of course, to light. They're transparent to microwaves, Wi-Fi, the whole range of radio frequencies. And inside, burning electricity like you've never seen, except in a big computer center, is massive collection and surveillance equipment. We've never got proper pictures inside those except through infrared in Berlin one time. That was spectacular. But what you've got is there essentially is phased arrays trying to take a focus on any Wi-Fi that's in range, on the whole of the GSM spectrum and GPRS, and systematically analyze it through floors of processing equipment which sit usually directly below the collectors. This type of system, which has been exposed a year or two in some of the Snowden papers, is a scanner to do signal recognition and acquisition across the entire arc, the entire globe of what can be seen from these huts. And what they boast, the organization SCS, is the Special Collection Service. It's the American end of the collaboration. Particularly draw your attention to the middle button there, the signal access for collection, exfil and infill, exfiltration, infiltration, microwave Wi-Fi, microwave WiMAX, GSM, CDMA, and of course all the familiar technologies. If it's being transported at UHF, VHF, and microwave, they have a collection system, not just to take, but potentially to inject, also to manage listening devices which may be powered by radio frequency beams. And on the other side of the Danube, that's just that way as opposed to that way, funnily enough, there's another tower. This one sits at Wagramer Strasse. It's part of the international city. Credit to Eric Mokel, a journalist for ORF, for exposing this one. It literally sits on top of the United Nations International Atomic Energy Authority, which is the white building just to the left of the big tower. And right on top of it, you have a funny little shed right there. That's a picture we just took a couple of days ago after they rebranded it. It's a little hard to see against the background, but the shed is still there, virtually in identical form to what's 3 streets away. Have a look at lunchtime, if you like. There's another more exact picture of the shed taken from a similar building. These are all part of a system called State Group, run by the Special Collection Service. And according to American documents leaked by Snowden, State Group sites are covert SIGINT, that's signal intelligence, collection sites located in diplomatic facilities abroad. They are covert, and their true mission is not known by the majority of the diplomatic staff at the facility to which they are assigned. It goes on to say just exactly what we've been looking at. The collection equipment is located so as not to reveal the SIGINT activity. For example, it says, down at the bottom line, antennas are sometimes hidden in false architectural features or roof maintenance sheds. Well, we've seen that. Should also mention, it's completely illegal, bizarrely enough, or ironically enough, under the Vienna Convention. But of course it happens. Another shed. We're not finished. The US Embassy in Botsmangasse, looking incongruous above the 19th century architecture. You're collecting from there. Same profile. And this one, which was an early exposure in the Snowden documents. This time you're looking at the false architectural features. The windows in this Victorian villa, which aren't windows anymore, providing facades beside which the collection equipment can be concealed. This particular site was listed along with the Vienna Embassy in a top-secret Snowden document showing the whole range of collection around the world, from satellites, from large cable accesses, from some 50,000 so-called implants at that time, that's malware, on infected and attacked host computers spread around the world, with the target of going to literally millions of computers with implants or malware, all answering back to the intelligence networks. They talk about this as points of presence, just as you would talk about an internet of points of presence. But their points of presence are for getting to cell phones, to transport systems, to any target that's within range, and planting or implanting security compromises if the vulnerability is there to exploit. This is one of the results of a survey. Again, all these top secret slides are from Snowden. This is a radio frequency survey. Which cell phones cell towers can we get? Which microwave links do we see from our site? Let's go there. And of course, this is not just an enterprise that is carried out by English-speaking countries. As it happens, as you sit here, if your signal is being taken by the British, as it passes over to their listening point, which you could virtually see from the window if you were a little higher, it's passing straight through the space above, first the Russian embassy, and then the Chinese embassy. And apart from the citizens and organizations of Vienna, no doubt they have a lot of fun bugging the hell out of each other, or trying to. The villa in the northwest of Vienna was the subject of demonstrations. Green activists went to take pictures after the Americans tried to stop that happening. Another area where we'll find sheds is in Athens, Greece. And these particular sheds played a significant role in events a decade or so ago, which led directly to the death of a telecommunications engineer involved in the Vodafone network. And if you want to hear how the sheds link to that unexplained death, James Bamford, the famous long-standing NSA author, is right here with us in the front row and is going to be giving the next talk on that very subject. That is an example of what they call effects. The real world is affected. These are not theoretical games when they try and compromise communications and computer systems. They're trying to do stuff as well. Not stuff that may work for the kind of purposes that would have served the people of Paris. And it's not just the English-speaking countries. Another slide here from the Foreign Collaboration Organization of the NSA, its Foreign Affairs Directorate, lists 35 third-party countries which are communicating with and intercepting cables, satellites, local signals, and trading them with NSA. Within such a country, Austria is one of the partners. Austria's participation is massive on the available physical evidence. This particular site, Königswarte, I hope I said that right, is about 50 kilometers east of here down the Danube. In the Cold War years, first in secret, it listened across the Iron Curtain. It listened to Slovakia and to the cities which are just too visible in the background of that slide. It's been massively expanded. Sorry, Bratislava was what I was trying to think of. It's been massively expanded and repurposed in the years since 1990. A whole array of satellite antenna tracking and intercepting commercial communication satellites. It's part of an American network called Rampart A, in which, according to the slide, the partners access international communications from anywhere around the world, ready to support your intelligence gathering. And a very important top secret at the top there, most Rampart partners work the fiber projects under the cover of an overt ComSat effort. What they're saying there is that folk like us, James, myself, techies like yourself, recognize a satellite listening station when you see one, because if it's government, if it's this big and it's not doing broadcasting, it's doing SIGINT. But finding out where they access the fiber optic cables and take data in bulk is much harder because the cables go underground. Some of my Austrian friends believe that their government isn't doing fiber. I suspect it's because most people in the Austrian government wouldn't know. Another top secret, summarizing what we are after with our third-party relationships, contains this rather revealing comment at the bottom that for a variety of reasons, our relationships are rarely disrupted. In many of our foreign partners' capitals, few senior officials outside of their defense intelligence apparatus are witting to any SIGINT connection to the US or the NSA. NSA might be willing to share advanced techniques in return for a partner's willingness to do something politically risky. So it's a barter place where access to communications, the ability to tap into data trunks, is traded off against something that may advantage local officials. The data flows from Austria to a European technical center, so-called, in Wiesbaden in Germany, where 27 separate countries pour in the data they're intercepting from their networks. It goes from there to, not directly to NSA headquarters, but to what they call Site C, a secret site to the north of the headquarters, the Columbia, Maryland. And this is also where all the data tapped off American networks, American domestic networks, flows in. So you're looking at one tentacle of a massive international collection system. How are you feeling, Owen Jet? What happens next to your data packets? The language used by the signal intelligence agencies can sound like normal English, but it's impossible to understand unless you've worked out the secret dictionary of tradecraft's terms. You have signals intelligence, that's understandable. But a tap, they call it probe. If they're monitoring it, they call it touching. Enabling, a very, very gentle word, specifically means breaking cryptographic protection. Shaping, again, traffic shaping sounds like optimal shaping, but in fact in this context it means misdirecting traffic, for example by BGP attacks, so that the data flows which are of particular interest are flowing right past where their monitors are. Some that you've come across more familiarly are tailoring, as in tailored access operations, or TAO. That is hacking. That is the whole process of hacking and implanting malware, setting up remote access points and exfiltrating mass data. Implant is their name for malware. Normally extremely sophisticated, advanced, persistent threats with many modular aspects to be added in, taken out, self-destructing capabilities, the sort of things that have just started to be seen by guys like yourselves in the last 3 or 4 years. The whole process of attacking and getting in is computer network exploitation. They don't ever use the words like hacking in their documents. And then, most seriously, the effects. This is making something happen. It may be interfering with an organization by sabotaging communications. It may be the deliberate physical attack of systems, as was seen with Stuxnet, and is intended and planned by what's sitting around on systems now waiting for instructions for cyber war attacks. The secret language primer in your Techies Tour's Guide to Inside NSA. A few terms that, again, are actually deeply familiar, but take a long time to work out from the documents. DNI we'd never heard of until the first stories from Snowden, but it means digital network intelligence. It's what they take from the digital networks. Okay, what's that? The most interesting word I found was having to have Mr. Binney, who had been the deputy director of NSA and then left in the month after the 2001 attacks because of the illegal activities. Just explain to me what sessionizer was. It's pretty obvious now, we're familiar with it now, but I can't see the word in big-time use in the language. What we'd all heard about was deep packet inspection, or DPI. But inside the agencies which started it, and in the companies which copied the technology to sell DPI in the early noughties, it was sessionizing. And of course, sessionizing is fairly obvious. rebuild the TCP IP sessions or the other IP sessions once you've taken them off the communication system. What do you build them into? Again, I think this slide is the first time anybody's worked out what this fundamental unit of a stolen data stream is. And it's a very simple word. It's atom. That's what they call it. They rebuild a packet stream, get it all in place, and it's an atom. And according to the Snowden papers, tens or hundreds of billions of those are being taken from the global collection systems every hour. Once it's rebuilt, this is on another document that you can see down there, the secret document. The metadata that's in the packet, which isn't just the header information, the port or other destinations, but other selected data that they regard as relevant, is parceled together in an atomic SIGINT data format and prepared for massive long-term storehouses so that it can be re-accessed in that form. If the selection systems want the whole of the contents of the sessionized communication, it's sent through massive fiber transports itself using the sessionized output transport format. And when the databases are built, according to many of the documents, they are addressed by a query-focused data set, a QFD. Has anybody heard the term QFD in their professional business? Anybody at all? I wouldn't think so, and yet this is a highly technical audience, and it doesn't sound like a very strange term. It's just, we've never heard it before. What does it mean? Looking at the papers, and with the assistance of my partner Matt, who's a coder and a techie who has helped me with many of these things, as far as we can see, it's a part of a standard database programming approach, which is extract, transform, and load. You've got the bulk data, you know that you want to take some elements out of it and put it into a database format. You create a QFD, and they have hundreds of QFDs for pulling out bits and pieces from the data stores. The technology to steal the internet has been putting stuff together from many different sources, being developed, as you would expect, since the early 1990s. The original systems which sessionized at a sort of T1 rate, I'm told, were in place by 92 and 93. Very, very simple, very, very slow speed compared to what's around now. But in fact, the lead was then taken by an outfit at NSA called the SIGINT Automation Research Center, SARC, and that was actually led by the man who 10 years earlier than Snowden also became a whistleblower, Bill Benny, the guy who's going to be here on tomorrow night after the showing of his film, as I understand. And his outfit developed the first sessionizers. They were cover-named the P25 and P26, which apparently meant nothing at all. It was more of a joke. And some of the higher-ups who wanted to know what the P1s and P24s were. This system sessionized at an OC3 or SDN rate at 155 megabits a second, and was the basis for the first deployments of monitoring the internet, a system called Grandmaster. The main places in which this turned up famously was after the code was given to the Israelis, and then Israeli engineers who'd worked in their signal intelligence outfit called 8200 showed up in companies called Nalis and Velit with sessionizers, which were then sold back to NSA and found by an AT&T engineer in San Francisco in 2006, leading to the first awareness that something very deep and dark and substantial was going on with the internet. NSA's name for this system appears to be Wealthy Cluster, but we just call it DPI, or we've been led to call it that. And by 2006, the data rates had gone up to OC48, 2.5 gigabits per second. The first American NSA attempts to develop big technologies were confounded by overreach, something that Jim Bamford knows a lot and has written about. A program called Trailblazer fell into the ground, so that it wasn't until 5 or 6 years after 9/11 that large-scale systems were deployed under the general program name of Turbulence, of which something called Turmoil was the passive surveillance system. But Turbulence also includes substantial components for automatically surveying intercepted signals, these packets, these atoms, and their formats, spotting vulnerabilities, and if the one end of that IP connection is a target, connecting to malware servers and looking for ways to attack, including by exploiting direct access to the transport pathways to inject packets and pages to send back in response to, say, Facebook or LinkedIn pages, but containing the infectious payload. By automating that process, according to some of the documents, the number of infected computers globally was by now targeted to have gone into the millions from the mere tens of thousands in 2010. Also by 2010, the data rates of the sessionizers had gone up to 10 gigabits per second, OC192, with aspirations to be able to track data 10 times harder than new optical fibers at 100 gigabits per second. Sessionizing is what you would expect it to be, what you would understand it to be from the ISO model, dropping in just above the transport layer and seeing what you can get. This is a secret diagram showing the processes, and again, they're not rocket science. If you handle the packets, if you handle IP, this stuff makes complete sense. And yet, it's completely obscured by the arcane language of tradecraft and the secrecy behind which it was conceived. You demodulate, you demultiplex. If in your multiplex early on you spot that it's an IKE exchange, it's an SSL protected and encapsulated communication, it's sent down to the automatic decryption systems, either on site or in remote facilities over high-speed trunks, and then re-injected into the packet system by a wealthy cluster, you see the name there, or turmoil, packetized and sessionized. A more advanced system called Deep Dive retains the entire data stream, potentially for 3 days, so advanced analytics can go across that recursively in order to pull out the data, and then processing it in the same way with the same formats. And retrospective searching therefore becomes possible with vast databases, but again, they're using the same tools, MySQL, Hadoop clusters, MapReduce, all the stuff that big data engineers have been using for many years now. This is the advanced processing. It was used and is used in the British Tempora system, which was mentioned early on in the Snowden revelations. But this is a broken system, as last weekend showed. And the roots are astonishingly historical. My best-known work in this area was bringing to attention Project Echelon, which was the 1960s project to start collecting from all the communication satellites, where decades before the internet, the methods of transmission are analog or telegraph, and these are some documents, again from Snowden, again top secret, which I was able to publish this summer in the Intercept magazine, confirming that Echelon was exactly what I described it as in 1988. That was most gratifying, a program for intercepting, you can see it there, to collect and process Intelsat communications during the height of the Cold War. Again, you see the extraordinary mispurposing of this intelligence empire. The Cold War was a serious existential threat to the planet, and yet NSA and the British were planning to collect against the civilian communication satellites of the West that didn't carry any Warsaw Pact communications. Perhaps you begin to see how the management and nature of this enterprise leads to demands for the surrender of privacy and security, and yet, as we saw, fails to provide it. The basic system by which the collection from satellites was done, which again James and I were hearing about years ago, was called the dictionary. But what's the dictionary? Now it turns out it's a system called cadence. And it's described here as a strong selection tasking tool dating back to the days of telegraphy. Yes. We've just gone from satellites to telegraphs to this chap. The FIS table is, I think, the forward instruction table. So they're saying, in effect, imagine you're this chap reading the telegraph symbol, you see something of interesting, you say, that word it matters, I'm going to forward it to somebody. Now again, we can understand this stuff. It's simple enough in technical terms, but what does it do? It's used in the X-key score system, which is the massive data ingestion tool for the intercepted internet signals we're talking about. So you're now seeing that a principal tool used to analyze data at 10 or 100 gigabits per second is something which is contextually extremely simple, actually rather backward, and dates back to the days of telegraphy. Massive amount of information, incompetent tools, focus on stealing everybody's data, and then not being able to do the job because of that. These are the components you can see organizationally, and perhaps you can also see them technically and contribute to their understanding. Here is part of the manuals published last summer for OPA, again, top secret of course, the X-key score system, which is, frankly, basically a Google of the atoms of your data communications and our data communications around the internet in the familiar ways. You want to do a real expression search? No problem. You want to write a bit of C++? No problem. Write a fingerprint. Anything and everything you like to grab any pattern of data that is supported. Once again, we find, and you can see some of the Linux data structures there, phone tab and so on. It contains the master and slave, and then the dictionary files. And once again, we've got cadence and the FIS tables from 50 years ago, still at the heart of this data processing system. There, on another X-key score program, just maybe 3 lines down under admin, are some of the things you can do. And one of them I think is rather important. Under computer resources input directory and then category throttle. Now this word comes up again and again in a number of papers. And what they're actually talking about is the Alta Vista Google OFAC problem. How do I reduce the number of hits I get? They've got this problem big time. They scaled up a technology from, I don't really want to say it again, the day of telegraphy, but that's what it is. The earliest and most broken form. It sits at the center of the processing systems. And what do they find they have to do? They have to switch off what they take from their searches every day because it overloads their own systems, sometimes massively. Here's a top secret 2011, an examination into the content collected by SSO, the Special Sources Organization, that's the outfit that goes into the fiber cables, revealed that a significant portion of collection was repetitive, better placed in meter repositories, and of little intelligence value. You give them big data, they screw up big time. And you can see there some of the explanations for why it wasn't working, why they had to shut it down. Here's another one. If an analyst needs to find all the people in Kabul performing web searches on jihad, how could this be done? Tasking the term jihad in cadence would result in voluminous collect as the keyword hits on every news, web page, blog entry, RSS feed. This is 2011. These are the smart folk of the biggest intelligence agency in the world, and they're just learning what we all knew 10 years previously. Here is another answer to the problem, the DNI throttle. Brought in, these are complicated reference to different cable tapping sites in third-party countries, but they're basically saying, we can't handle it anymore. They're busy building a massive data store out in Utah, in the center of the United States, to store a database called Pinwheel, which is essentially these atoms of internet thing, and yet they can't handle the data. And these are limitations from a particular slide under the DNI throttle heading. Here is how, if you're a programmer of XKeyscore, you implement the throttle. It's not very sophisticated. You just turn the category throttle parameter to true, and it's going to shut down all these newsential extra communications that you're gathering, which might, of course, have been the relevant ones. So you're looking at a highly not fit for purpose site. But boy, do they like what they can do. They tamper with the routing tables of the internet to send the data flows past where they want to. BGP protocols of attack are one of the ways, but sometimes, such as in America where they have direct access to the carriers, the rerouting instructions can be issued by legitimate communications providers. They are targeting to get inside networks and secure systems above all, because that is what they seem to hate most of all. Anything that they can't get is their biggest target. So these are a list of British top secret operations to get into mobile communications. Who's on a proxy system here? Anybody using an internet mobile proxy? There we are. Well, of course we all are if we're not Austrian. They want into the GRX systems, which handle mobile roaming of data. They want into the gateways, and they want into the billing clearinghouse accesses to see what they can do. This particular operation targeted Belgicom, the Belgicom communications provider, and right there in the attack tables you can see the autonomous system number 6774. Look it up if you work in this area. You'll find that it's the international roaming facility of Belgicom, and massively attacked by Britain's GCHQ. It's not in the Middle East, it doesn't support terrorists. That's what they spend their time doing. They also attacked a German satellite provider, Stella, and in this context used their ability to map into the internet to see just how far they got inside to its autonomous systems and its linked networks, and the results are frankly horrifying. This diagram about getting the SIGINT is taken from NSA's treasure map, which is their essentially global strategic map for cyber warfare. And in this particular diagram, if they have collection, then they have a red marking inside the autonomous system symbol. If they can get to the link, that's also shown. You can see just here on the left that they not only have ownership of both nodes, both systems, but access to the communications between them. And yet they still didn't do the job. It's a bit extraordinary. Most of these systems on this diagram, which includes 8 European autonomous systems peering with the German company Stella, are shown as owned and access points. That's a great achievement for getting to steal data, but it didn't stop Copenhagen, or both events in Paris. And this is Paris. That's the US Embassy. And that is not a Louis XIV piece of architecture. It's another damn embassy shed, painted to look like the windows were putted out in Victorian times. This massive structure sits at the bottom of the Champs-Élysées. It's got a wonderful line of sight to the presidents. But apparently, as President Obama said this weekend, no line of sight at all into the people who did so much harm on the city streets this weekend. What they collect from Paris, WikiLeaks has recently published in a separate set of leaks in the top secret global SIGINT highlights. They're targeting top officials, trade negotiations. They're not targeting what really happened. They're not able or interested or competent to do anything about it. Just last night, while I was putting this talk together, another Snowden document was deployed in Venezuela, where it turns out that once again, another set of embassy shares is targeting terrorists, Venezuela's petroleum company and its activities. The end point of this talk, which perhaps Mr. Binney will be able to pick up if he's got time tomorrow night, is that by going for data at scale, on the evidence of our history in Europe in the last 10 years, including 9/11, their hubris, their overreach, their satisfaction that they are so clever that nobody but us can benefit from or exploit the security breaks, the one days that they keep secret, has dramatically failed. And in this document, you start, and it's what I would invite you to reflect on, think about, bring to your practice or bring to your politics. They go back to the technologies that were being developed in the late 90s for the internet. Mr. Binney will talk about them. They were highly selective. They were directed to throw away early at the points of sessionization that which was not useful. And here you see some notes of NSAers going to Bad Aibling in Germany in 2006 to see what the Germans are doing. And the Germans were still using code that the NSA had given them in '99, which was restricted, ensuring that analysts, for example, cannot view protected German traffic, protecting civil liberties, discarding stuff. And they also give us a clue that if the walls of secrecy are lifted and sensible technologies are applied, there is a way of making the security-privacy trade-off not a zero-sum game. By throwing away as much data as possible intelligently at the sessionization of collection points, you enhance the value of that which is retained. And this is referred to just at the bottom, that the turmoil system can scan and make judgments at the packet level prior to any sessionization. I can say this before this audience, try and say that to any politician in any of our countries, and they'll think we come from the planet Mars. And yet, in this technological context, if there's one thing I ask you to take away from this talk, in this context, could this work? Could you bring your knowledge or ideas of security systems and protocols to this problem and say, and ask and tell colleagues, is there an answer to making privacy protections and the integrity of communication systems better, while also, and perhaps as an effect and as a result, enhancing our security and making it clear on technical, evidence-based grounds that privacy and security do not trade off against each other, but work. In that way, perhaps, society can repurpose the SIGINT monster. Thank you. I'm in the hands of Renee, but I think we have 7 to 10 minutes before the next talks.
I think we have time for questions, if there are any.
Good morning, thank you. You mentioned the problem with the sheer volume of data. Don't you think it's just a matter of time that they solve that problem?
The sheer volume of data on the evidence appears to be the problem. I mean, hey, I'm a journalist. I like getting as much data as possible, but I've also had to get dirty with big data and realize that simply finding that which you want or really need is a major problem. I don't think there's any straight or simple answer to this, but the over-collection of data, the overreach, and the investment in these systems are what seems to have failed. If you look at the records of the investigations of Charlie Hebdo, the Woolwich killings in Britain, New York, the Boston Marathon attacks. In all of these cases, these people were on the radar, but the resources were all put into the technical collection systems and not into the old feet on the ground, follow people around, do the long-term work of trying to cultivate human agents. So the evidence-based lesson of the year since 9/11 is not necessarily what you would predict, but it does appear to be the evidence that the collection of big data doesn't work. The French introduced a new surveillance law this summer to massively increase their access to data and communications. And yet, you see the result.
Thanks. Another question?
Hi. I spent my last 5 years at ENISA, the European Security Agency, or whatever you name it. And our way really, I could not accept as an European citizen that the EU has done any move against GCHQ and say from a state perspective. Do you think this will change? If, how, and when?
The question is whether, as I said, just before you, whether the EU will act decisively to limit collection systems. I am fearful. We first addressed this, I think, in the context of an investigation in the year 2000 into the echelon system, which I was asked to lead, and then they spent another year checking to see if I was right, and concluded I was. There was then a massive number of proposals to enhance security, protect cryptography, and restrict access to that which was proportionate. They were all passed by the European Parliament on the 5th of September 2001. We know what happened next. The problem almost is not so much the techies or the institutions, it's the media, it's my profession. Because every terror attack is interpreted in the most simplistic way as justifying extraordinary measures, military attacks, more domestic surveillance, and not in a politically mature way of actually trying to build security. The results are devastating in terms of the Middle East, in terms of Europe. You have to see it in that whole context. But we're probably going to see that the blood on the streets of Paris, like the blood on the streets of New York and Washington, Boston, will be exploited to demand more military authorities and more surveillance. So there was catastrophic failure of the political institutions to have an educated, mature, long-term response to what is seen and reported. That is a problem, and I wish I could be optimistic, but I'm sad I'm not.
Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you for that. To your last point, the French are actually trying to pass constitutional changes to give them more rights to invade privacy, so it's a little bit harder and harsher than just asking for more weapons. The other aspect is that, well, it's more of a comment, probably a question, but technology has made it just easier to do this, right? This has been going on for centuries. There is no, I mean, we're not learning from history because, you know, one classic example, you know, in light of the French incidents, but Louis XIV built Versailles so that he could put everybody into Versailles and spy on them as he saw fit, right? So, I mean, we're not really introducing any new concepts, we just made it easier because of the technology.
I very strongly agree with that sympathy. There's nothing, that sentiment, there's nothing new in history. And the tendency of rulers to overreach goes back to before biblical times. But can we learn?
we learn from history and that we don't learn from history.
Well, that sounds like the best epitaph to the end point of the talk you could give.
So, I think we're out of time. Thank you again.
So